The company is your child. And if you've hired people, their children are your children too. You kind of just have to go do it. When you do use your network for intros or use your network to get them to use your thing, do be cautious that they're going to say nice things. And you really want to look at their behavior. Are they actually using it? Are they actually paying for it? And not just are they saying nice things because they're your friends. They're likely to say nice things. So number one is just do it. Number two, and this might be tough for a product as sort of horizontal as VC, but if you're a founder that is building an AI solution for patent lawyers, go give them a little bit of equity. Go find like the 30 or 40 people who kind of have the best insights and make them advisors, give them a little bit of equity in exchange for them just reading your monthly product and kind of like investor updates. Now you don't have to feel bad anymore pestering them for intros, asking them for feedback on what you're going to build next. Realistically, they're going to feel invested and they might like having that thing on their LinkedIn. That'll be like the tactical side of things.
So Mike and I met, before I officially founded General Collaboration. And it was before I fundraised, earliest stages of thinking through GC's business model and go-to-market strategy. And we were introduced that you were one of the strongest sales go-to-market minds in tech. And with your track record of, Dropbox and Whimsical and Clearbit, I'm sure all of our listeners will quickly see why that is. Now you advise and consult with a focus on helping seed Series H founders like myself, figure out their go-to-market strategy. So today I'm pumped to just learn from your expertise, get super tactical, super actionable with case studies from your past, maybe using General Collaboration as a bit of a prop and sandbox to play around with. This is going to be a lot of fun. Thanks for coming on the show today, Mike.
Thanks so much for having me, Elliot. I'm super excited to jam with you. And yeah, I appreciate the very kind intro.
So I'd love to take a start by looking back at your career path. I think one thing that's pretty cool is how you started at Clearbit. So my understanding is you were their first go-to-market hire. And if I've got it right, you were simply their first salesperson. And you grew and grew and grew eventually. But how did you get that first role as their first salesperson?
Yeah, so I spent a few years at Dropbox learning sales and seeing the org grow from about 15 to a few hundred folks. Mm-hmm. But before that, I was working at this very small test prep company in Asia with vision of kind of growing across Southeast Asia and North Asia, and had this very kind of interesting, scrappy startup experience. And from those two things, I knew, hey, I like the scalability of tech, but I also enjoy the kind of grit and grind of the very early stage. So at the end of that Dropbox experience, I knew I wanted to go somewhere kind of as early as possible. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know where. So I went and talked to all the kind of most connected people who I knew. A lot of people that had left Dropbox and gone on to VC roles or had done some angel investing. So I ended up getting in touch with 30 or so seed and Series A businesses. An investor, Mark Goldberg, who was at Index at the time, he actually just launched his fund, introed me to the Clearbit folks. And just told me, hey, this team is really smart. And if somebody's going to win in this kind of like data space, it's probably them. So yeah, I met the team that way. And then there was this unique thing where the problem they were working on was very similar to a lot of what I was seeing, trying to figure out this new type of sales. We now call it product-led sales at Dropbox. So when I met the team, I kind of like very quickly understood what they kind of had going. And I think that probably inspired some trust in me from them as well.
That's super cool. Like it's so important, and it's so like a lot of it's luck and a lot of it's putting in the hard work that you just described that you did of if you're gonna hitch yourself to an early stage startup, you gotta be damn sure that they're gonna be successful. And probably 9 out of 10 times they aren't, but you did your work and you found one that turned out to do pretty damn well. I think one thing that's super cool about your story is that when we talk about joining a company early stage like that, I know for me, when I've done that, one of the questions in the back of your head is always like, okay, am I going to be able to grow in this role? Am I going to be able to become like the guy to lead this pillar, this function, or am I going to get hired over? And being able to grow like you did at Clearbit is really what everybody joining an early stage startup really aspires to do. You leveled up quite a bit as the company grew. walk me through what was your experience there? What were the pivotal actions? What made your time there so successful?
So man, I certainly didn't do everything right, but I think the thing that worked really well for me is I threw myself into the business and
Mm-hmm.
tried to understand the company, the product, the space, in as much detail as I possibly could. I was also grinding and taking whatever 12 calls a day in the early days, and even managing customer IO. I didn't realize that my job was marketing as well, but the early team thought sales and marketing was the same function. But I think what allowed me to kind of keep my job was just caring and developing like a real perspective on the things that we should do, and that also ended up making me successful at enabling reps, and then even like doing some kind of company-wide enablement stuff over the time there. I think like the founders of these companies are so kind of like attached to this thing that they have built that I think they're just looking for people in their orbit who don't care as much as they do, but like can come close-ish. I think I really cared, and I put in kind of a lot of the effort to do things not just in sales that kind of made me credible with everybody else.
Yeah, it's as a founder, finding those people that really care, that really give a shit about your business that's really all it takes at the end of the day. Like if you find people that are passionate and truly care, and not just at startups too. I mean, thinking even to my time at Meta, the most impactful teams that I was on, we somehow tricked ourselves that we were at this 80,000 person company, but that like this was our baby and our role was so important. And whether it's big company, small company, if you put in that level of care and attention to detail, it goes such a long way. That's awesome.
It is. It's rare, it seems like. Dropbox had a lot of it, and I think Alex, the kind of CEO and initial founder, was really great at hiring the first 10 or so folks that did care in that way. I've spent a lot of time consulting and advising now, and at some companies you've got like the two founders, and maybe there's somebody else who is like really invested and has a take on where the business should go. But I do think that's like one of the inputs into startup success. It's like how many folks are really kind of like fully invested.
So you had this incredible experience at Clearbit, and right around the time that you left, you're invited to be a venture scout at Craft Ventures. You started to do a lot of advising and consulting. Take me back to that moment. Like what opportunity, what problem presented itself to you that made you want to go into consulting and advising full time?
Yeah, my career has been much more random than this kind of like super strategic path. But the answer there is I was trying to figure out my career. I'd spent almost 5 years at Clearbit. The initial founding team had left, new CEO joined. I had a kid. It was like, that's some equity. It was time to go find something new. And I'd learned a lot as well. I kind of joined as a first go-to-market hire. At the end of the time there, I felt kind of ready to take on kind of a much more senior leadership role. So I ended up just reaching out to this same group of people I reached out to between Dropbox and Clearbit, and then, hey, I'm going to leave Clearbit at some point this year. Like, just introduce me to all of the interesting founders you know of who are seed, Series A. I'm not going to charge them for consulting or advising, but I just want to help out and get to know these people and figure out if I might want to work with them. So I started having these conversations in my last kind of 4 or 5 months at Clearbit, mostly after I'd given this kind of like long notice. And then through that, I ended up meeting a lot of interesting companies and had some friends that were investing. So I'd make VC intros. And that's how the scout thing came about.
Oh, cool.
My good friend was at Kraft. I introduced him to some interesting founders. And when they launched their scout program, I was kind of invited to join that. And then that's also kind of how the consulting path started. I could talk more about that if it'd be interesting, but I'll pause.
Cool. So let's dive into how you approach consulting. And it's I know, thinking of myself as a founder, and when I think about go-to-market and sales and all of this, it's overwhelming to start. Where do you start when you're working with a startup, when you meet a founder for the first time, you're going to start an engagement?
Yeah. So if you have a mature company, like it's kind of confusing, but it's pretty straightforward to figure out how well the company is doing, right? Like they have clear metrics, they've got revenue goals, they've got product goals, they're either hitting them or they're not. But with the types of companies I tend to work with, which are either seed stage businesses or maybe they recently raised a Series A, but probably haven't hired this like proper VP of sales or CRO. There's not a lot of like data to look at other than just like high level metrics. So what I end up doing is just looking at calls. And like there's this thing that happened 5 or 6 years ago. Everyone in sales went out and bought Gong or Chorus, and now there's like 100 tools in this space, and everyone records their sales calls. And what I found is if I can listen to 2 calls with like a decent fit prospect, I can get a pretty good understanding of like what's going on at that company. And that's actually how I sell my consulting. I'll just do that for free and then give the founder some thoughts and they think, hey, this guy's credible. He's got some ideas on what we're doing wrong, what we could be doing better. But if I listen to like 7 or 8, or maybe more if there's a real go-to-market team in place, I'm going to recognize things about sales tactics and sales motion, but also about ICP and positioning and whether that's resonating and are they senior enough in the org and do they have a next step to push prospects to and a bunch of other random things that are kind of hard to predict. So I think it just comes down to kind of grinding a game tape. It's kind of how I get plugged in and figure out what kind of needs to happen. And I can talk more about that if you want, but I think that's kind of been the key ingredient to the success that I've had.
Got it. Okay. So one thing I'd love to do as we continue the conversation is kind of our listeners here are going to have 2 separate needs, and I'd love to bifurcate when we can. There's going to be true sales when like you need a user to pay, and then there's I'll call it like user adoption, where for example you might be looking to engage free users, start a product-led growth motion. So with that in mind, kind of wearing those 2 hats, how do you identify and then reach out to your first set of customers? Personally, I really struggle with this. There's literally just this like infinite number of options, and it can be really intimidating to figure out where to start, especially when you don't have much brand recognition. You're just inventing your sales process. How do you start?
Yeah, so I haven't done this process, but I've seen founders do it. And when you're a founder of one of these companies, or even you're thinking about becoming a founder, you have an asset that no sales rep does. And it's that like people probably are kind of interested to talk to you. Right? No one wants to talk to me, sales hire number 15 at whatever company, but interesting founder who just left their PM leadership role at Meta and is going to do something super innovative in this new space. They might want to talk to you. And I would use that. I think that's kind of like the key thing until you've identified a reason for them to talk to you, right? Once you can graduate from, hey, I just want to get feedback from you. I'm a smart, capable person who might build a great company and I want to get your take and I want your advice. You're really smart. That for a while. And then you need to explore different channels to figure out how to activate that, whether that's friends and family or investor networks or cold email or even cold calling. But the goal of doing all that should be to figure out, hey, what is the thing that I don't need to be this really interesting founder to get them to engage with me, right? Like it's hey, I, Elliot, have found this thing that every IT leader is struggling with, or at least IT leaders at companies that use this stack that are adding headcount at more than 2x. And I can like point out this problem that I'm pretty sure that you have. And I'm pretty sure you don't have a great solution to. And it's like, once you've found that from the early conversations, then you can activate conversations through outbound email or ads or calling, or AI SDRs or whatever the channel might be, or content that pokes that problem. But the goal should be to get there. I guess, you ask this on behalf of your audience, but you're also building a company that this is probably heavily relevant for. Like, what type of progress are you making to kind of uncovering that kind of key insight that might allow you to kind of seal a message?
So what you said initially is exactly what's worked for us so far. We've struggled finding the right positioning for the company. It's a unique product. It's a bit of category creation, but that exact pitch that you used coming from me as a founder lands pretty well. And it's something along those lines of like, I was a meta PM and I quit to build this tool that I wish that I had had. And I think you have this problem too. Are you willing to talk? And the click-through rate on that pitch is pretty high, even when we're going like totally cold outbound, especially on LinkedIn. That's been a great channel for us. But I've struggled to, despite having all those conversations and hearing this language back, have really struggled, and I think it's a category creation problem, to figure out what's the language that, how do I position the company? I figured out how to position myself. How do I position the company and graduate to that next phase?
Yeah, I think there are some frameworks there, but a lot of it just, you've got to find it. So it's like, it might be more conversations, or maybe it's conversations with a different buyer persona who might kind of like have a different version of that same problem. But I don't know that there's like some formula for unlocking that insight, other than more conversations with more types of people.
For sure.
So you kind of got to just, you got to keep running.
Yeah, I certainly feel like I have to grind it out. No silver bullet on that front. How else can a founder like me keep things simple? Like, is there a specific sales methodology that you recommend for founders doing this sort of founder-led sales?
Yeah. So I think this is actually like a risk with founder-led selling is you end up on LinkedIn and you're seeing all the sales thought leadership and learning about all these different kind of very sophisticated sales methodologies. That stuff is fantastic, particularly if you have an org of 20 reps and you want to take conversion rates from 22% to 24%, which means you hit your number versus you don't. But for founders, I don't think it's that complicated. And often the things that I'm working on with them, at least at first, are relatively simple and consistent. And the thing I would say is if you have a call, and it's kind of more a sales call than maybe this kind of customer discovery, customer development call, you should be trying to do two things. And like everything else is secondary, right? And those two things, number one, it's uncover a high priority problem that person and that company have. Mm-hmm. Right? So it should be a high priority problem. They should be able to kind of tell you how it's impacting them or what the impact of solving it would be. And they should tell you that, hey, this is kind of amongst the top 3 or 4 things that I and my org need to solve. So that's the first thing, right? It's can you do deep enough discovery to find a problem? And then the second thing is super straightforward, but even kind of like seasoned reps don't always do it. It's get another call scheduled. Right? If you can find a problem and you can keep the conversation going, like you're doing pretty well. And that isn't just pestering them to get a calendar, to agree to a calendar invite at the time, but it's actually like suggest a natural next step where it's, hey, folks like you that kind of have this problem and are fairly excited about what we're doing. Typically, they really want to know, can like we actually execute on X and Y? And the way we prove that out is by doing Z. Like, we want to get together next week to go do Z. We'll do it on a call. And like, it's just so much easier for them to sit back and let you guide them through the process of evaluating your tool, which they don't know how to evaluate because there's never been a product like general collaboration. But those are the two big things.
I love that. Like hearing that out loud, the simplicity of those two things makes perfect sense. I guess it sounds like that with those two things, you have to adapt, you have to iterate on those two things to dial it into a point where it's really working. How have you helped founders adapt their approach to those two steps? How do you know when it's time to adapt when things aren't working?
So the interesting thing about working with founders is like I try to write up my notes, my thoughts fresh every time, and I do, but I almost could templatize it because you all tend to make the same sort of mistakes. The first one is you just talk too much, right? You spent a year or two building this incredible product and you want to tell them about it and about all the details and this feature that you have coming in a month that's going to totally like reinvent your space. But the first one is just to kind of shut up and to figure out what is the top kind of compelling problem that they have.
Mm-hmm.
That is kind of the key. And very few founders do that naturally, or salespeople for that matter. It's hard to kind of like have a discussion about them, but they do want to talk about them, and they are very interested in their own problems. So that tends to be super useful. And that's usually the first thing that I work with founders. And there's a lot of tactics around how to do that, how to ask these questions and what problems to look for. But that's usually step number one. And then step number two is kind of the thing that we just talked about. It's like, have you built a process where if they're not thinking about evaluating general collaboration, doesn't fit into something they budgeted for last budget cycle, like how should they evaluate it? And having kind of that in mind where you can help them, you can kind of be a part of their team and teach them how to think about it, how to build a business case for why they should do this instead of other ways they could spend their time and budget. And you do those two things, and again, you're going to be in pretty good shape. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of other pieces of sales that you need to think about and are important, figuring out how high to get on the ladder and negotiation. But like the fundamentals are kind of the key at this founder selling stage.
Zooming out from like the last few things that you've said, what's really coming through clear to me is that we're talking about sales, but what we're really talking about is positioning. And that I think a founder like myself is so anxious to sell that a lot of times, even with the line of questions that I'm asking, I'm saying, like, okay, well, what do I do next? What do I do next? What do I do next? And you're kind of pulling it back to like, without the positioning, you can't do anything else. We recorded, we did another podcast recently with this guy, Anthony Pieri, and I think he put it really well. We were talking about landing page design, and he framed it as what's your orange chicken in the context of Panda Express. And like, if you go to a Panda Express, they've got this hot bar. There's like a million freaking things that you can order, but they're handing out samples of orange chicken, and they're never handing out samples of anything else. For general collaboration or for any startup, what is your orange chicken? What is that thing that if you get on a call with someone, like you said, I can't just throw up every feature and idea that I've had as working on this for 2+ years. What is the one thing that I can do that's going to position the product in a way that, to your point, earns me that next call, that next interaction? It's hard to narrow it down. It's easier said than done, but it really feels like that's the core of what you're saying is use sales to figure out your positioning. And once you figure out your positioning, then go and sell that.
Yep, that's exactly right. And by the way, I think you and probably your audience aren't here yet, but once you try to start hiring people to like replicate your process, having that orange chicken is absolutely critical, right? Because you created all the different stuff on the buffet line. It's not a buffet line at Panda Express, but whatever you call that behind the glass barrier. You created all those. You know how to talk in detail about like the beef and broccoli as well. But can you hire a rep and then 5 reps and CSMs and teach them all the nuances of every flavor there? Like probably not. But you get them really good at uncovering the problem to sell the orange chicken. The analogy doesn't hold up perfectly, but I tried my best.
Are there any other, like speaking of top mistakes that you see founders tend to make beyond those that we already discussed? Anything else that jumps out to you that you feel like you're constantly reeling the founders you work with in on?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of were just hitting on it, but there's this idea that like, all right, the founder probably did a pretty good job of customer discovery when they were going and interviewing people and coming up with kind of the product to build and how to talk about it. Like, you should stay in that mode, even on sales calls. So what I see on sales calls is it's like, all right, founder has learned that discovery is important. So they're doing 10 minutes of discovery and then shifting to maybe a 20-minute demo, or it's a few minutes of slides and then a demo. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you look at like in Gong and look at the talk time, and it's like half and half in the first 10 minutes, and then it's like 95% founder for the last 20. That is not good. That whole call needs to be discovery. And if you listen to that call, there are probably points in the demo where the prospect said, whoa, you can do that? Or you just show your killer feature and they're like, not that interesting. Mm-hmm. Right? Every time you get surprising feedback, surprising good, surprising bad, like pause. Why is that? Why was that so exciting to you? Like, is there a way that you see that feature kind of plugging into your business? Or is there some way that this actually helps you address the priority you talked about 5-10 minutes ago? But you need to keep kind of doing discovery, right? Your goal is not to get through the call and check all the boxes of I completed the demo. It's to uncover that kind of unique insight that's going to power the deal. So that's the other big one. It's like, yeah, the goal is not to finish the demo. If you do, that's fine, but it's often actually better if you don't, right? That gives you a reason for them to join a call next week. Hey, we didn't get to the really amazing kind of AI agentic experience that we just launched last week, but I think it might be useful for you. Like, let's cover that on the next call, right? You're actually in a better spot to sell because you didn't finish your demo, and the time you would have spent demoing that last feature probably went towards kind of having a richer conversation that might have unearthed the reason for them to buy that pain. So it's stay flexible and keep having a real conversation throughout.
Mm-hmm. Could you share? I'd love to hear some specific examples of like this approach put into action, whether it's from clients. You don't have to name names if you don't want, or places that you've worked in the past, but to hear about this iterative process and how you learned, how you course corrected along the way.
So I think Clearbit actually, there's a pretty good example of this. In the early days, we were growing fast. We had a lot of demand, and we were executing pretty well on these deals. But we had a very small team of early sellers who deeply understood the problems, and it was kind of going pretty well. What we found, though, was when we hired more folks, we ended up growing from like 2 to 9 reps over the course of 6 months. It got difficult to sell every deal in a bespoke way and to have each seller solve the founder's problem or the prospect's problem, regardless of what that problem was. So I actually spent a lot of time trying to figure out, hey, what am I doing on the calls where I'm having the most success, and how can we kind of scale this across the team? And what we found, even just analyzing our customer base and kind of thinking about it, was there's this type of company that represented most of our good leads, that they're PLG businesses, or just high velocity businesses that had hundreds of thousands of leads per month. And Clearbit had a really unique way of servicing these customers. And what I would do on these calls when I found one of those is I would actually ask them about, hey, I bet with that number of leads and the kind of millions of website visitors that feed into that, you're probably having a ton of trouble just like differentiating these different segments of your business, right? Like which of these leads and which of these website visitors deserve this enterprise hand-holding experience, deserve the enterprise value prop on the website, are qualified for sales engagement, and which aren't. And that really resonated. We actually had a really kind of interesting solution to that problem. But it up-leveled the conversation quite a bit and allowed Clearbit's reps to have a conversation with these prospects that wasn't tactical. It wasn't based on features. It was based on an insight that kind of we had as a business that our competitors didn't. And we won those deals at an incredible clip. So we ended up kind of productizing or operationalizing this sale based on sort of a more strategic insight that ended up helping us sell to more senior folks. It further helped the win rate, or at least us maintain the win rate as we scaled sales headcount with these higher value prospects. And it's what I'm looking out for a lot of times when I go consult, especially for a founder that might be selling to 3 or 4 segments. So the messaging isn't super dialed in for any of those 3 or 4. But if you take the highest value one, dial in the messaging, it just tends to be easier to kind of scale that conversation.
Got it. One thing I'd also love to ask you about is thinking of founder-led sales. So often as founders, you try to, or you're pushed to lean on your personal networks and use your personal network for early customer acquisition. Is that something you have experience with? How do you leverage those relationships? It's part of this could just be, I don't know, imposter syndrome or some version of that, but it's so awkward to do. How do you help founders start doing that better?
Yeah. Usually founders end up working with me once there's a little bit of demand.
Okay.
But even then, the network is ridiculously valuable. So I've got one tactical thing and one very non-tactical thing. Maybe we'll start with the non-tactical, and it's just do it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the company is your child, and if you've hired people, like their children are your children too, and it's like you kind of just have to go do it. And when you do use your network for intros or use your network to get them to use your thing, like do be cautious that they're going to say nice things, and you really want to look at their behavior. Are they actually using it? Are they actually paying for it? And not just are they saying nice things because they're your friends. They're likely to say nice things. So number one is just do it. Number two, and this might be tough for a product as sort of horizontal as GC, but if you're a founder that is building an AI solution for patent lawyers, right? Like go give them a little bit of equity. Go find like the 30 or 40 people who kind of have the best insights and make them advisors, give them a little bit of equity in exchange for them just reading your monthly product and kind of like investor updates. And now you don't have to feel bad anymore for pestering them for intros, asking them for feedback on what you're going to build next. And realistically, they're going to feel invested, and they might like having that thing on their LinkedIn. So that'll be like the tactical side of things. Does that resonate at all, or what have you found kind of gets you over the anxiety of reaching out?
I think that that like Nike just do it mentality definitely resonates. It's awkward, but you just have to do it. I'd love to double click on the bringing people in as advisors, giving equity away. That's something that I haven't done yet, but I've been considering it. What are your thoughts on that? Like when people do that well, what are the things that they're doing beyond my fear is that I just give this equity away and then I'm not sure what to do once I've built this advisory board or whatever we call it. How have you seen that done well? How have you seen that done wastefully, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's two types of advisors. There's like the person who you're hiring to actually help you implement some new product thing or to help you figure out your branding or positioning, or that's been a founder in your space before. And like, that's something completely different. So let's like put that over on the side. This is giving very small amounts of equity to people who you just want to be on your team.
Right.
And I'm not a founder, so maybe my take here is off base. But if those people are going to be valuable in some way, right? At some point they could become customers. At some point they might refer somebody to you, or maybe they won't go write an angel investment check into your competitor because you gave them equity. Like it's probably worth it. And realistically, when you're a seed stage company, you're worth whatever. $5 million, $10 million, $20 million, but you're not really. Like you have no revenue. You're not really worth anything. So at the stage where you're making these gives, I would kind of favor just trying to do it and assuming that if you have really good ideas and you have good insights and you're going to share them monthly, like it's going to be worth it for the eyeballs. Right. Mm-hmm. Assuming these people are the people who might have influence in your category. Yeah, I think Zach Vitibor at a sales tech company called Octave. I think it's octavehq.com. But I'll correct that if I got it wrong. They did a great job of this. And it helped them frame the product, help them test it. He writes great updates on where they're headed and the types of intros they want. And I'm sure there are a lot of people in their kind of very large advisory program that have been dead weight, but there are a lot that haven't. And I think, yeah, if you're pre-product market fit, It's like all of the chances you have for someone to introduce you to the key design partner, or to ping you an idea that you hadn't thought of yet. I think it's just worth it to increase kind of like the number of like positive things that could happen to get you to one.
And it sounds like you're recommending, like you said, you're not reaching out to this isn't like other founders. These are leads. Like you're taking people that could be potential future users, potential people that you sell to, giving them a little bit of equity so that now they are invested in the company and hopefully they adopt through you continuing to hound them and build that relationship with them. Are you doing
exactly.
cold outbound
they're
to these
probably
people?
your buy persona, but they also are likely connected to a lot of folks within your buyer persona. Now it works. This again might not work as well for you if your users are like really networked Silicon Valley people, right? They might say, oh, what's kind of like 2 basis points in some startup, and they're calculating it. It works really well for people that don't traditionally do angel investing and they're not kind of pure insiders. And it's like, it's probably less about the equity than putting the badge on their LinkedIn that, hey, I'm an advisor of general collaboration. Like how cool is that? I would think about, the persona that you want to work with, and like, will they find this interesting? And they probably do authentically want you to ask them questions and value their advice. So, it's worth a shot.
Any other, I don't know, call it like things that don't scale, manual processes that you've pushed founders to do or that you've done in the past early on that wouldn't necessarily work at scale? Like what we're talking about now certainly doesn't work at scale, but it's one of those things that you can do early that can be a force multiplier. Anything else come to mind?
Yeah. Totally. I'm honestly not even sure why it can't work at scale. Like if you just up-leveled who you're giving smaller equity grants to, like a lot of these things we think can't scale might be able to. The other one that I like that is more kind of sales oriented is trying to like really help the customer solve the problem, right? So in Clearbit's case, like we were selling data that we could really nicely integrate into your CRM or marketing automation tool or onto your website to power website personalization. And we could prove that our data was the best, and we could get it installed. But we actually weren't solving a problem by doing that, right? We were solving a problem if we could help them think about their business and figure out kind of their 3 different personas and how to actually set up the website personalization in some other tool, and then figure out how to measure that and report on it to their CMO. And initially we could never do that with all of our customers, but we did do it early on with the customers that really mattered. And then we had a lot of success actually hiring people who could help us scale, kind of helping customers get kind of all the way to value with a big project that they care about. And I think early on, you absolutely have to do that, right? You can't just deliver them the thing that you built. You've got to like make them successful with their business metric. But a lot of times you can do that at scale. If you claim you can sell your thing for more, which means you can hire people who are doing the professional services or kind of that implementation work. And oftentimes it does scale further than you think. And if you're looking at the biggest technology companies, that's what they fully do. Or you're like Accentures and Deloitte's. But I would say focusing on the whole problem is kind of like this hack that, it probably isn't as in vogue with like most early stage founders, but it allows you to build the user love and get kind of like wildly successful early customers.
Any other tactics that you've seen or any other, call it like secret plays that you've seen work really well? Especially one thing that we haven't talked about yet is AI. So whether AI or not, but any interesting things that you think founders should be experimenting with, playing with, that are a little more off the wall?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't talked to many folks who've had success with AI SDRs, sadly. I think we all wish you could hire an AI SDR that solves all of our pipeline problems. But there are consultants who can do really neat things with AI and tools like Clay to scale kind of some of the personalized outbound that you might be doing today, but it's just too time consuming. So like hire a consultant to use Clay if you have a play that works and you want to scale it. The other thing that I've seen AI working for is selling it. Almost every company that's evaluating SaaS software has some type of internal initiative around efficiency or AI, and it's almost always coming from the C-suite or even from the board. But like if you talk to like the VPs of X, a lot of them don't have answers on how they're going to drive efficiency or how they're going to use AI in their function. So the more you can up-level kind of what you're doing to like, actually like, this is what we're doing today, but this is how that sets us up to do this really interesting AI thing. I've had a couple of clients that have been able to use that to get from kind of always being stuck at the manager, director level to getting the VP and C level. And that's where AI seems to be working the best today, is kind of turbocharging your sales motion.
I think there's also something like even stripping the AI bit out of that a lot of founders get so focused on selling like what exists that they don't realize that in these sales contexts, they often need to be selling the broader vision. A buyer isn't just buying the product today. They want to buy what you're aiming to become and what direction you're growing in. And it's easy to forget that that's important to share, that people want to hear that.
Yeah, especially if you're selling to large companies. I mean, they're planning on you being a vendor for the next 3 to 5 years. So what functionality is coming and what vision you're building towards is important. It's also important for them to know that, hey, you have that and you're going to be around in 3 to 5 years because you're building towards something that they think the market wants. That's super well said. And I think it's like you want to do a great sales motion does both things. You get super tactical to like what is the top 3 priority kind of problem that you have today that we can address. And it's like you're super in the weeds. And then you're also super visionary, right? And if you buy us to solve that problem, here's what that'll mean for your org over the next 3 to 5 years. You'll be on this kind of incredible journey with us. And if you can kind of like tie both of those things, you'll have a lot of luck getting deals done.
You actually just made me think of something else that's kind of related. One thing that I wrestle with is, do I act like myself? Do I act like the size that we are? Like, is it a good thing when you're seeing founder-led sales? Or do I need to make a fake email account for some like fake salesperson so that we appear bigger than we are? Which route do you recommend people to take? Or is there a time and place for either?
Yeah, there's only one route, sadly, because they're going to figure you out. That your company isn't huge, that you're early in your journey. So yeah, authenticity is the answer here. And then the neat thing is that the types of customers that you actually want are the ones who want to go take risks, right? And depending on what persona you're selling to, that might only mean 2 to 5% of the people in that role are even like in your early ICP, but they're the ones who are going to value what you can tell them, which is like, hey, like we aren't huge. We don't have a massive engineering team, but guess what? Like you're going to have my phone number, right? And if something goes wrong, like I'm going to respond to it. And if there is a feature that you absolutely need, like can't guarantee I'm going to build it, but I'm going to think really hard about it. And we're going to have a conversation about that thing. And this doesn't apply as much to you because you don't necessarily have like a clear enterprise alternative. But this is the way that you need to kind of compete against your entrenched incumbent that might have the features, but they're not doing that innovative thing, and they're not going to be kind of on the team with the prospect. Right?
Yeah.
You're going to be one of my 5 biggest customers. We don't tell them they're going to be your biggest customer, but you're one of our 5 biggest customers, and turn that into like a benefit, which it is. Yeah.
That's interesting. It's always tough to make that call, but what you're saying sounds right. Like you got to be authentic or you're going to get caught otherwise. And you don't want that to blow up in your face for sure.
Yeah. There's this anecdote of a founder that I work with. So he has two integrations. Like he only works with companies that integrate into this one system and Gmail, right? And his competitor has like 12 and is ahead in a lot of ways. And what he's now saying in his cycles is, hey, like if you use whatever, kind of these outdated systems, legacy systems, like we're not going to build that in the next year or two. We are only focused on customers that use these two platforms. And what that means is all of these kind of really exciting AI features that we're focused on building, we're going to build them as quickly as possible, right? We're not going to go expand our TAM and integrate every system, but like we are only going to focus on the two systems that actually he knows that you use. And the use cases it unlocks that we're focused and only have these two integrations to maintain. And he gets to go from being kind of like behind to actually being in a better position to execute quickly. And you got to think about, hey, what are those ways that you can take the drawbacks from buying you and turn them into things that authentically are good reasons to use you. And those things likely exist, but you might have to be creative to go think about what they are or learn them from talking to your customers and prospects.
I like that a lot. We get a lot of questions like that when it comes to our integrations. And that's a really great way to frame it, is that it's like, yeah, if you want to use those legacy systems, sure. But we're focused on this, and that allows us to focus in these ways. That's genius. Mike, this has been an awesome conversation. I'm so grateful for you coming on the podcast and for sharing so much. Where can people follow you to learn more? Or if any listener wants to work with you, reach out to you, where's best?
Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll accept random connection requests. My name is Mike Heller. You should find me there. And then you asked about resources, right?
Yeah. Any favorite resources, podcasts, books, newsletters? Where do you read when you want to learn?
Yeah, I'll give you three. So I think Founding Sales from Pete Kazanji is a really great kind of like all-encompassing book around what you need to be thinking about if you're gonna do founder-led sales, and then build kind of an early sales team. Definitely read that. In terms of how to sell, if you're operating an environment where you're going to need to sell kind of mid-market to enterprise style deals, there's a ton of books out there. I think the best one is this relatively new one called Selling With by a guy named Nate Nasrallah. He spent his career doing enterprise SaaS sales. So the examples are very relevant to what a lot of kind of modern founders are thinking about. And instead of being kind of formulaic, it kind of talks about the psychology of the organizations that you're engaging with. I think the hardest thing if you're a founder that hasn't worked in these very large companies, or if you're a sales rep who's been just selling, is like, what actually happens after you pitch your thing and they say they're going to go chat with their team? And this book kind of gets into that dynamic in a lot of detail and helps you figure out how to navigate it. And then the third one that has been useful to me, but you have to read it for a long time, is Stratechery.
Oh yeah, love that.
Do you read Stratechery?
I used to be like, everyone that worked at Meta read that. Now it's those are heavy blog posts that come out pretty frequently. So I do not have quite the time these days between the startup and a baby at home, but I'm a huge fan.
Yeah, the two kids makes it hard, but I tend to try to do the podcast when I can. But I just think whether you're a founder or in really any role in startups, like understanding the landscape generally is really helpful. And it takes some time, but if you read Stratechery for a year or two, you're just going to come across as kind of more sophisticated and kind of smarter. But this is a little bit more like homework.
Yeah. Those are three great resources, and we'll be sure to share those in the show notes. And then to close out, any final takeaway? We've had so many already, but if a listener walks away with one thing from this episode, what is it that you really want to hammer home?
Go talk to prospects and make sure that you're doing more listening than talking.
Love it.
That's it.
Love it. Well, Mike, thank you again for coming on the podcast. This was such a great conversation and great to catch up. And we'll talk again soon. Thanks.
Awesome, Elliot. Thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.